Players gather to cast powerful blue-green spells, some of the newest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Icefang Coatl, Ura, Titan of Nature's Wrath, Oko, Fief of Crowns, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy in the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and theepicstorm.com.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the Eternal Glory podcast, episode 29, Bad Cards, Good Decks. I'm Phil Gallagher, joined by Bryant Cook and Brian Coval. I would normally ask, how are you all doing tonight, but I'm going to ask a different question instead. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much love are you feeling from the community right now?
It's about a dark depths, Phil. 20 out of 20.
Yeah, I'm at like a 9.7 myself. I'm impressed Bryant broke the scale with a 20, but I'm feeling a lot of love. Pretty close to perfect.
I was expecting like an 11 out of 10, but we've gone full Merilage. I really do appreciate that. So, Bryant, tell us, tell our viewers why we're feeling so much love and support right now.
Well, during our last episode, we mentioned how we were a little bit light on the funds, and the Legacy community really took care of us. As the person that set up the PayPal account, I got to read all of the beautiful messages that came in, and it really meant a lot to both me and, I don't know why I said both me, but to me and both Brian and Phil. We really appreciate everyone taking care of us.
And there were also some really great and interesting comments on Reddit that supported us as well. And it really validated us and made us feel like needed and wanted. And just thank you, really heartfelt thank you to everyone in the community.
So there's a long list of names here. Phil, why don't you read them?
All right. Apologies in advance to our donors, whom I don't know, and I get your name wrong. Here we go. Evan Gravenzo, Benjamin Salzberg, James Whitehouse, Taurin Skinner McGinnis, Ryan DeCrane, Daniel Becker, Timothy Coletti, Thomas Hepp, Albert Lindblom, Dick Fisher, Jaming? ? Sorry on that one. Bill Schlichting, Timothy Everett, Jim Mangus, Kwok Wu, Rudy Summers, Ron Guiro Schiller, Simon Bullhoff, Evan Flynn, Zach Vanderzee, Kenneth Dulson, Jero Siepel, Grant Wu, and Henrik Korkutz. That's the longest list I think we've ever had on this podcast. Thank you all so much for your support. The episodes will be flowing for quite some time, and we've done some pretty cool show notes today, and I hope you enjoyed this episode as well. All right, so life updates. We're going to try something slightly different this week. Some people have asked us to get to the magic stuff a little bit quicker, so what we're going to do is we're going to do our personal life stuff first, and then we're going to transition into magic stuff that's not directly related to the episode topic, and then we're going to go directly into the episode. So, Bryant, let's start with you. What's going on in real life?
So, it was a little bit awkward. Every year I do an annual domain and fundraising for theepicstorm.com, and it's always July 31st. I didn't realize that when we were releasing our episode, it was the same day, and it was a little bit awkward. I was like, 4 years in a row I've done this date. And now we did it for the podcast. I'm going to have to wait a week. And I also feel like it's weird asking for donations for both things right around the same time. But the Storm community really stepped up and made sure that the Epic Storm domain costs were covered. So thank you to everyone that donated. It means a lot to me personally, on top of everything for the Eternal Glory podcast. We hit our goal, so thank you very much. In the previous years, I've always given our site writers gifts with that extra money around the holidays. So the first year was custom pint glasses with the Epic Storm logo on them and a 6-pack of local beer from Empire Brewery. Sorry about that. Then the last year it was Scott Fisher signed Burning Wish prints. They were the first ever prints ever made. And another year, I think actually that was 2 years ago. Then last year was the Epic Storm pullovers. So I have to figure out what to get the site writers this year. If you have any good ideas, feel free to message me on theepicstorm.com and help me figure out something cool to get them, because I love showing the team my appreciation for what they do.
You should send them the Epic Storm branded Tendrils of Agony, which are like metal pipes that they can stick in people and suck out their life force. It could be handy, like in a tight spot. It's like a caffeine boost.
What
I don't know.
about like a toilet seat cover? Grape shops.
With
I don't like
Tendrils
these
of Agony
ideas.
on it. You just open up your toilet seat, and on top of the lid, like on the inside, is the art of tendrils. And then the toilet is full of the tendrils. Or it
All right, I
it
get
will
the
be
analogy.
shortly.
You think my deck's shit, okay? We move on.
All right. We can move on.
That was a strong bit. All right, Brian, how about you?
I have finally have something new to report. The past 5 months of How Are You Doing have just been, I've been sitting in my house watching TV. But I went back to work officially today. Day one was still virtual for most of us. It was just a lot of trainings and housekeeping sort of stuff. But tomorrow I am physically in the building for the first time. I have to wake up at 5:15 in the morning, which is about 6 hours earlier than I've woken up in the past 5 months. So that's going to be a harsh adjustment. And we'll see how all that goes. In addition to the COVID stuff, my organization also did like a pretty large restructure over the summer, and a lot of policies and staffing ratios and various things are pretty different. So everyone is kind of heightened on the edge. Like the normal back to school excitement buzz isn't there. It's like dread instead. So I'm going to do my best to power through that and do my job, serve the kids, as long as we stay open. But that's all I have on my mind right now.
I started watching Westworld. I know I'm like multiple years late in that regard, and I think Brian wants to yell at me for that.
I'm so excited, Phil. It's one of my favorite shows. It's my favorite active television show. By far, not even close. Like, Westworld Season 1, it's fucking brilliant. Season 2 is and then Season 3 went back to being insane.
Oh, did it? Because I've watched 1 3/4 seasons of Westworld. Should I get back in?
So the problem with Season 2 was that the writers and directors of the show, they read Reddit. And like Episode 2, someone just like posted the entire season's plan. So they went back and like reshot and changed everything to make it more convoluted. And I think it just ruined the show. Instead of caring about one person figuring it out, they should have just went with the plan.
Yeah, I'm about 3 episodes into Season 2 right now. And I keep thinking like, am I misunderstanding something? Or is this like a vast continuity and plot error? It's like, okay, that's glad to know that they did a bunch of rewriting, and that's why things feel a little weird. Because I adored Season 1. For the listeners out there, I don't really like shows with real people most of the time, but this one is a gem. It's a real treat. In other life stuff, there's been like weird mini disasters all around me recently. There was a literal dumpster fire outside of my house, as in the dumpster got hot and caught fire. Like, fire trucks came and everything. Like, I was getting ready to stream, and I looked outside, and I'm like, is that smoke? And my dumpster was on fire. And then there was an earthquake. So, this week's been cool.
Normally that smells just your donation deck list, but
yeah, that's fair.
Wow. So the dumpster, was it just hot from the sun and the contents of the dumpster caught on fire?
Yes. And this is the second time
Wow.
that has happened.
Those things don't happen north of the Mason-Dixon, just floating that out there.
Yeah.
We've had a scorcher, like my lawn is half dead, but nothing just spontaneously combusted in my yard.
Yeah, it was just like at, I don't know, 5 o'clock at night or something like that. Just, it caught fire. Like, I don't know.
So for a weekly grilling thing, before we get to Brian, because I don't want him to... no, I guess we didn't do it. Inspired by Brian's grill fire story, I cleaned out my grill, which is something I've been dreading to do, and it took me all of 3 minutes to scrape all the excess food out. so I will not be creating any fires.
Yeah, it's not bad. Once you get in there, once you realize it's important and go do it, it's actually pretty easy.
All right. Awesome. So let's go ahead and delve into sort of our MTG quick hits is what I dubbed this section. So I'm going to start. So speaking of like the piles that I play on stream, I was recently playing Karn Oko Enchantress on stream. It's exactly as glorious as you imagine it is. Turns out like playing those cards early off of just like enchantment-based mana accelerators is pretty darn good. And I ran into this super cool interaction that I did not realize. So I had the Abyss in play, and my opponent had a couple of creatures, and I had Karn, and I played Mycosynth Lattice. And my opponent conceded. About a minute passes, and then someone in chat goes, "Hey, wait a second. Did you actually just kill yourself by playing Mycosynth Lattice?" And I was like, "But why?" It's like, well, because Mycosynth Lattice turns everything into artifacts, right? And the Abyss doesn't kill artifacts, it's non-artifact creatures. So your opponent conceded to a Mycosynth Lattice Karn lock, where they actually just had 2 creatures on board that could have attacked and killed the Karn.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
So there's your fringe interaction of the week, folks. Just caught me and like 70 viewers off guard, and then one person in the chat found it out. Like that was a cool one.
I think that's the second best Mycosynth Lattice oops, everything's an artifact story. The best one is from the Modern Pro Tour, where Karn was premiered, basically. His big day in the spotlight, where somebody jammed a Lattice, and the opponent attacked with a Construct token, and the opponent was just like, okay, no blocks. And they were like, you're dead. Because it's just an XX where X is permanence in play. Yeah, so the old got yourself with Mycosynth Lattice.
Like, I've played a lot of Karn, and every once in a while I keep coming across these like really weird things that Mycosynth Lattice does. One of my other favorites from about a month ago was tapping an Ancient Tomb for double colorless to cast Petty Theft from Brazen Borrower and like bounce either the Karn or Mycosynth Lattice and kill me. That was real good.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot that Mycosynth Lattice had that whole line of text, and there are a number of videos on my YouTube channel of me frustrating because I have to click in extra time. Like, when you make the mana to cast a spell, you then have to decide what color that mana is going to be, even though you tap the right number of lands anyway. And I'm just like, why is this happening? Moto is bugging. This is affecting my time. I'm going to time out. But later I learned that's why.
All right, do either of you have some good MTG stuff from recently?
Well, somewhat recently, about last week, I tweeted something about Force Negation that, was trending for a little bit, and a lot of people decided to tell me about why my tweet was wrong, saying that it's not Force Negation that's wrong with Legacy, and that it's Dreadhorde Arcanist or Oko, the things fueling Force Negation. And the main part of the tweet was saying that Force Negation has created a consistency within the blue shells, where I'm not saying that I want Force Negation banned, but the blue shells have become so consistent where I don't know if, honestly, if your intention is to win, you probably should just be playing a Delver deck with 6 Forces and Delvers and Dreadhordes. Like, that deck is just so consistently powerful where it gives you the best odds of winning, and you're doing yourself a disservice by not playing them. And a lot of people decided to tell me that I was wrong and blah, 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 and then tried to explain a bunch of like fairly obvious things to me. But it's Twitter. You shouldn't have to write an entire article on Twitter. Like, people should assume some base level things, and that didn't happen. So I felt like I needed to say something about this because they were telling me it's the card advantage that's fueling Force Negation. But like, when they banned Survival of the Fittest, they weren't like looking at the creatures. They banned the card that was helping fuel. And I understand that Force Negation, like, if you want to ban Force Negation, you should ban Force of Will. But that's not how Legacy works. Like, there's sacred cards like Brainstorm and Force of Will. And I don't think they'll ever ban Force Negation for what it's worth. I'm just questioning how consistent the blue decks get to be now. Because, like, even against Chalice decks, like the decks that Phil plays, they're 60% to have a Force for your turn 1 Chalice now. Like, that's changes the format a lot.
And that's in addition to all of the other answers for those sorts of things that have been printed in the last couple of years, such as Brazen Borrower and Oko as well. We could probably go off and do a whole episode on this sort of topic. So I think I'm
that's
just
a different
gonna
episode.
Let that one go there. But I think it's a really
Brian was
interesting
biting his
thread.
tongue the entire time I was talking.
Yep, I'm just going to let Bryant have his soapbox and say nothing about the obvious flaws in his argument. So that maybe come back in 2 weeks where we talk about why force negation is absolutely not bannable or a problem.
Well, I don't think it should be banned for what it's worth.
I said come back in 2 weeks.
So then the Pioneer bans happened where they banned my Breach deck, but the new one is so much fun. You just get to cast Omniscience and then enter the Infinite. Like, it's insane. And you'd think that, like, well, you need 14 mana to put Omniscience into play. I thought it would be a steep cost, but like when you're forking your untap effects, it's really not. So that's kind of cool. And I qualified for the Vintage Showcase, which is kind of sweet, playing Old Trusty Paradoxical Outcome. I played a couple of challenges the weekend before, and I was struggling against Doomsday, so I changed my deck a little bit. I cut the main deck Hercules, I added in a Mystical Tutor, I added in a third top to help out the Mox Opals, and it really made the deck a lot faster because you were able to get rid of your tops a lot more easily. Like, you didn't mind cashing in a top for a card, and you were just like casting Tinker consistently on turn 2 a lot more often, which was pretty sweet.
Nice. I also played quite a bit of Vintage. I did the Gen Con online for all 4 days that it was happening. There was a Thursday through Sunday. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, there was a Vintage and Legacy qualifier each day. And then the format championships were on Sunday. All of the qualifiers were 4 rounds. And if you went 3-1 or better, you qualify for the championship. And I qualified for both championships on day 1. And then I took a day off. I played, but I was being silly. I played non-blue decks. Like I played Hogak in Vintage and Muxus Stompy Goblins in Legacy, and I went 2-2 those days. And then I came back with a 4-0 with Ninjas on Saturday, and a 3-1 with a Rug Xerox in Vintage. And then I top 16'd the Vintage playoff with Trusty Old PO, and I bricked hard out of the Legacy one with Ninjas. But that was really sweet. It was a ton of fun to just like play Legacy and Vintage for 4 straight days. And I got my prizes last night. I tweeted this last night, and it got a lot of shares. You may have heard this story already. But I ended up with 146 prize tickets at the end of this week. And a prize ticket is worth 1 pack on the prize wall. And I took all of my prizes in Magic Online packs because, like, that's the easiest way to just cash out. Just 146 times 3, get all the ticks. And I got my email last night, and it had 146 different codes for individual booster packs that I had to copy and paste into the Magic Online client one at a time. So,
Direct.
Yeah, I mean, that was completely in line with how this event was structured throughout. Like, it was very clear that the Gen Con staff were working hard to make this happen, and Magic Online / Wizards, whoever the buck stops with, was just like, I guess. So there were a number of things where, like, the Gen Con staff, they set up a Discord. They were really engaging. They were like, yeah, we're going to have like your results in like 5 minutes from now. And then it's like 4.5 hours later, they're like, yeah, we haven't heard from WotC. Like, we can't actually give you your prize tickets until they tell us the results of the tournament. And then, like, clearly when they redeemed the prize wall to WotC just took like, okay, so 4,000 M21 packs were redeemed. Here's 4,000 codes. Go ahead, divide them up however you're gonna. It was just such a crap show, and I'm sure that it was trickling downstream. The Gen Con staff were great.
That sounds delightful.
Yeah, I mean, it was a ton of fun with just a couple minor, like, weirdo things that happened along the way. But I'm glad it happened.
I'm hoping that Eternal Weekend happens online. I think that would be pretty cool.
I think that it will. I know that Nick Koss has been working on that. I think it will just be a matter of if WotC buys in and lets him do it. But Magic Online has become intertwined with the last 2 years of Eternal Weekend anyway, because they were, or maybe it was just last year. Last year, the top 8 of Eternal Weekend got various amounts of Magic Online product with their top 8. Like
Really?
Yeah, the winner of like our reigning vintage and legacy champs, they got one of everything. Like a complete set of every set that's been released was part of the first prize, which is like nuts, because if you think about like that's so much better than one of everything, because it's like Tarmogoyf's been printed 3 or 4 times. That's most of a set of Tarmogoyf. Chalice of the Void, same thing. Like just a full set of every set, just beamed right into your Moto account. And I got like 36 packs of whatever the master set was at the time. Like it was good for like 200 ticks or something. Like it was pretty nice for a top 8.
But there's still no Black Border Merchant Scroll?
Afraid not. Isn't the foil Black Border?
It is, but then you're using a foil on Magic Online.
They're frequently cheaper.
Can't you shut off the animation and then they're basically the same?
Yeah, that's what I do. Like they just have like sort of a glint to them, but nothing is moving or super obvious. And the only time it bothers me is if like the foil is cheaper when I buy my first 2 copies, and then I need a 3rd copy later, and now the regular one is cheaper. And then when I lay out my deck for like the Twitter picture, it shows like 2 Ren and 6 and 1 Ren and 6 next to it, which is a minor tweak out for me, but ultimately fine.
I do the same thing, Brian.
Yep. Not cool, but I made a decision in my life that I will just always take the cheapest path on Magic Online. I will not pay a single cent more for like the good art or whatever. So that it's extremely utilitarian. My real life collection has enough nice things in it that I can live that way.
I spent about $1 getting nice planes for Magic Online. That was about the only style thing I did.
Okay, I lied. Basics matter to me, and I recently had to switch up my basics due to one of the various Magic controversies. Like I was on Gurus, and now I'm on Unhinged. So I did recently spend about $12 to change my basics over. It was a tough sell, but we did it.
All right, Phil, why don't you tell us about these bad cards and what they have to do with good decks?
Okay, so section 1 here I've dubbed the Strength of Synergy. Alright, so there's some cards that are played in Legacy purely because of their individual strengths and power levels. Think about your things like Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt, Ponder, Brainstorm. These cards are just like the best at doing what they're doing. If you're in those colors, you probably should have a reason to not be playing these things.
I was just going to say, Lightning Bolt has a pretty good synergy with my basic Mountain, Phil. I don't know if I'm buying this yet.
Well, it doesn't have good synergy with Chalice of the Void, which also has good synergy with Mountain, but better synergy with Ancient Tomb. But we're trying to keep this episode focused. You understand, of course. Anyway.
Damn, I think Phil just told me to shut up.
That's what I heard, and I agree.
Anyway, so then there are some cards that are strong, but they're stronger in a specific shell. So here I'm thinking about things like Dark Confidant. Dark Confidant is a pretty good Magic card, right? But if you're playing it in your deck with Emrakul and Griselbrand, it's a little more questionable than if you're playing it in your deck that has like a bunch of Moxen and 1-drops and a whole bunch of lands. Or similarly, something like Daze is a perfectly fine Magic card, but when you can really take advantage of the tempo swing that it presents, it's an even better Magic card.
Yeah, I can tell you, back in the day, there was a Daze Miracles deck that was the flavor of the week for like 1 week. Somebody, I think someone in Europe, won a tournament with it, and then it was hot on the SCG tour for exactly 1 week until everyone remembered that it's bad to Daze in your control deck. Like, the deck just played like 4 Mentors, 4 Tops, 4 Daze, and it was just trying to Delver while also maintain Miracle stuff, and it just didn't work.
Wilson Hunter is rolling over in his grave right now. For what it's worth, Phil, there used to be a vintage deck around 2007, I believe, maybe even 2008, that ran Darksteel Colossus with Dark Confidant.
I mean, for what it's worth, I played Tin Fins, and I played the man plan of 4 Dark Confidants and 4 Monastery Mentors in the sideboard, and I just, like, no feared played those Bobs alongside Grizzlebrands and Emrakul. It was fine, except for that one time when it was not fine.
At the first Eternal weekend, like after it split from Gen Con and it was a standalone event for the first time, it was in Philly. In the Vintage main event, in the final round, I was playing for 7-2-1 or whatever, X2-1, playing for top 16, and I was playing some fair deck. It had like Young Pyromancer and Deathrite Shaman in it, and my opponent was way ahead with their control deck, and then they flipped Blightsteel Colossus to their Dark Confidant, and they went from 14 life to 2 or 3 life, and then they died, and it was pretty sweet. So I've seen these things where you can be betrayed by your Confidant.
All right, so Category 1, cards that are carried by their individual strength. Category 2, cards that are strong, but are stronger in certain homes. And then Category 3 is the ones that we really want to focus on today. And these are cards that are objectively weak, but in the proper home, they shine, and they become very, very powerful. There are some cards that when you look at them in a deck list, you go like, they're playing that in this legacy when they could be playing name card that was printed in the last 2 years. And we want to really focus on what makes some of those bad cards good today.
So can I start this section off with a confession? The first time I saw the Ninjas list, that's what we're about to talk about, this Ninjas list, because this is the inspiration for this topic pretty much. I saw Retrofitter Foundry as a 4 of in this otherwise Delver-looking shell, and I was like, what the hell does that do? Like, why is that there? Do games go that long? Like, what? Is there nothing better you can do with your mana than this? And then I realized that Changeling Outcast and Ornithopter, 2 other bad cards that are in this deck, are just Thopters on the front. Like, this is a 1-mana way to turn your shitty enabler into a 4/4 beater. And, like, it just turns 3 bad cards in your deck into 3 good cards.
Hey, Brian, taking one step back, will you just explain what mode of Retrofitter Foundry you're talking about? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who are still pretty unfamiliar with that card.
You're right. I broke my own rule of this is an auditory medium, and I didn't tell you what the card does, because it's not in front of you. All right, it's a 1-mana artifact. You can pay 3 colorless to untap it. You can pay 2 colorless and tap it to make a 1/1 servo. You can pay 1 colorless, tap it, and sacrifice a servo to make a 1/1 Thopter. And you can tap it and sacrifice a Thopter to make a 4/4 construct. So on the surface, I've played this card in like decks that could make infinite mana. I had like a Zerda deck that played 2 of this just as an option. But in this like fair looking mid-range bug shell, it just didn't make any sense to my lizard brain. But then the final mode, tap, sack a Thopter, make a 4/4, interacts with these shitters you have to play to turn on your ninjas, and everything became clear to me.
I mean, that's not even the only synergy within the Ninjas deck, though. For those of you that don't know, Yuriko is a ninja that the deck is mostly based around because it is like the ninja lord, so to speak, because it triggers with your other ninjas, such as Changeling Outcast and Phil. I don't know the name of all these cards. What's the 4-mana one?
Ingenious Infiltrator.
That one. All right, so that one draws a card whenever another ninja deals damage, so it triggers with Changeling Outcast and Yuriko. Yuriko reads, reveal the top card of your deck. Your opponent takes damage equal to its converted mana cost. That card goes to your hand. It is not a draw trigger. And so Yuriko triggers with those other 2. And when I was first facing this deck, I was like, okay, this seems kind of cute. I see what's going on here. And then I got hit by a dead drop for 9 damage. And I was like, that's pretty sweet. So that's another example of synergy between this deck. Like, the Ninjas deck is almost like a synergy-based Delver shell, like Brian said. It has a lot of, like, the Delver look and feel, but the cards aren't all powerful on their own. But when you pair them together, you create a much more interesting shell that can be better at times, because if you have the Infiltrator with Yuriko in play, you're drawing 4 cards your opponent's taking at the bare minimum of 6. So that's kind of cool. Or, I'm sorry, that would be 3, right?
I don't know.
I'll shut up now.
Let's let Jarvis figure out the math on that one.
Sounds good.
No one else is capable of it.
So let's.
Yeah.
I'm going.
Where are you going, Phil? Are you moving on?
I was going to talk about like our baseline stats of these creatures.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So, like, let's look at the stats of the creatures that are the enablers in these decks. Changeling Outcast is a 1/1 for 1 mana. Can't block. Can't be blocked. That's a creature that I might not even play in limited most of the time.
You don't. You really don't. Unless you're Slivers.
Ornithopter is a 0/2 flyer for 0 mana, and while that's cool and all, 0/2s don't close games very fast, or rather, they don't close games at all. If we compare this to the power level of other cards at this cost in Legacy, like when you're playing something for 1, you could have Brainstorm, Ponder, Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt, Delver, Mother of Runes, Ether Vial, Goblin Lackey. Like this, it's not on the same power level as other 1-drops in Legacy. It's just not. But even though it's below the clearly acceptable power level on its own, when it enables Yuriko, when it enables Ingenious Infiltrator, when it becomes something that you can turn into an elk with Oko, when it turns into a 4/4 with Retrofitter Foundry, all of a sudden, these creatures that are kind of shitty on the surface, and you might question why they're in the deck, they actually become quite good. When you start thinking about, like, mana rates, if your opponent spends 1 mana to answer your free Ornithopter, like, score, right? Like, if you've gotten a Fatal Push or a Lightning Bolt or a Swords to Plowshares on your Ornithopter, that means something else gets to live later. And these creatures actually start to look pretty darn good.
Ornithopter was in one of the best standard decks of all time, Phil. So I think that might just be a good card on its own. If you've ever put a cranial planing on it, you understand.
Hold on, which one of the cards is good there?
Yeah, Ornithopter is just the poster child for a bad card that frequently makes its way into good decks. Like, it exists to create synergy. Like, there's no reason to put that card in your deck if you're not going to synergize something with it.
Yeah, and even every once in a while we see something crazy like a Cheerios deck that like plays Glimpse of Nature, and then like Ornithopter starts to look pretty sweet there too.
Hell yeah.
So one thing about the Ninjas deck is there are lists where they try to get away from playing Changeling, Outcast, and Ornithopter, and I've seen lists with Snapcaster Mage and even Baleful Strix. And when I face these lists, the first thing that I notice is that they're a lot slower. You lose Retrofitter Foundry, which takes away the fast draws, so then you know that your opponent's just playing a slower Delver Shell, and they're playing more of a grindy engine, which might be good if you're trying to beat something like Snow, or maybe even like a 4-color control deck that isn't Snow or Miracles. Speaking of Miracles, it won the showcase this weekend. But I don't know if those lists are actually any better than the ones playing Ornithopter or Changeling Outcast. Like, I know on the surface you feel like you're a smarter wizard playing Snapcaster Mage or Baleful Strix because you're playing with good cards, but good cards aren't always what's right. And I have a lot of experience with playing bad cards in my average decks.
I think when you take the deck that is meant to be built around synergy and you start like picking little bits of synergy away from it, you just end up creating a deck that's more awkward. I think the Bug Ninjas deck is actually good because it leans so hard into synergy from different directions. It's a deck where it's not just like A and B are a combo, it's A and B are a combo, and B and C are a combo, and C and A are a combo, and D and B are a combo, and there's all these little interlocking parts that interact in slightly different ways that all work together for one coherent game plan. I think that's what makes the deck strong. You don't have that many, like, wrong piece hands.
Well, Phil, there has to be other decks out there that use synergy, right? Like, it can't just be Ninjas.
I don't know. Do you have any experience with any of these sorts of decks that are built around synergy?
Have you maintained a website for 4 years about such a deck by any chance?
Well, 5 years. But I wanted to talk about Miracles. So after Top was banned, there was this like pretty bad card that I've seen play for quite some time. Now, I even got some of them signed.
Let me tell you about this card. This card, it's like Ponder, but it can target a player, and you don't draw a card till later. I'm talking about Portent. So if you're not familiar with Portent, it is what I just described. It's look at it's a 1 blue sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of target player's deck. You may have them shuffle put them back in any order. You may have them shuffle, draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep, which was a perfectly playable legacy card before Ponder was printed. Like, this was actually just the next best thing after Brainstorm. We didn't have Ponder and Preordained back in the olden times. Like, Portent has a pedigree in legacy, but it's long since obsoleted. But the reason you would put this card in your deck over the first Preordained, for example, like, I played 2 Portents, 0 Preordains for a while in Miracles. And the reason is drawing a card later, when combined with the Miracle mechanic, means that I can Portent myself on my turn. Like, I can, like, play Jace, Brainstorm, Portent me, pass the turn, flip Terminus in your upkeep, and clear the board. So it was a clever way to work around the lack of the instant speed draw ability that Top was providing for the deck. You had to work a little harder, but it did its job.
So I think that this is an important example. Is it's a synergy within the Miracles deck, but I wouldn't necessarily say that Miracles is a synergy-based deck. You can have smaller synergies within your deck without needing to go all in with something like Ninjas.
So like, Counterbalance is not a good card on its own. Like, we're going back into, like, the Top era, which is a dead era, which isn't super relevant, but compare Counterbalance in current Miracle Shells, which is optional, cuttable. Like, some people sideboard them, some people don't play them at all. Some people still try to make it work, even though I think it's crazy. But that was just, like, the lights out for the longest time because of the synergy with Sensei's Top. And Sensei's Top is, like, fine. Like, you get some card selection, but, like, without shuffle effects, without Counterbalance, without the Miracle ability, Sensei's Divining Top is only fine. Like, that, it does a lot of cool things, but really, like, having that card in your limited deck wouldn't be super exciting. So that there's a lot of small synergies going on there.
Yeah. So it used to be that, like, if you got Counterbalance locked, you were locked for the rest of the game. And now in 2020, if someone plays Counterbalance, like, there is a real game to be had. Your spells can very likely still resolve every once in a while. It's not quite the vice grip that it used to be.
Yeah,
you only need to resolve one, Phil.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Veil of Summer. Veil of Summer shuts off Counterbalance, and then you just murder them. I've done it multiple times recently.
See, I was thinking it from that works from the Epic Storm perspective. From the mid-range control deck perspective, you only need to resolve one. Any one will do. And the question you're asking the Counterbalance player is, how many 3-drops do you have in your deck?
Yep.
Because I'm going to jam Teferi, I'm going to jam Oko, I'm going to jam Monastery Mentor, I'm going to jam Uro. Any one of them's going to win the game. How long can you float that 3-drop on top of your deck? So that's like that's an example of a card just eating shit when its partner left the format.
Well, another part of that is, if we rewind back to Counterbalance's heyday, the curve of Legacy was a lot lower. Like, 1 and 2 was pretty much where decks capped off, outside of, like, Force of Will or, like, your Jace the Mind Sculptor sort of cards. In 2019, 2020 cards, they tend to be a little bit more expensive, but the effects are a lot more dramatic. When you're looking at things like Narset, Karn, Uro, Oko, all of the degenerate cards, they just win the game on their own, but they're also just a tiny bit more expensive, and that's another thing that makes Counterbalance worse, is, like, decks actually have a mana curve now, where previously, I don't know if that was the case.
Yeah, my exit in the Gen Con Legacy Championship, the person who eliminated me in our Game 3, they went Cloud Post, Cloud Post, Cloud Post, Glimmer Post, Ulamog. They just made 4 land drops and cast Ulamog, and I was like, okay, there goes a couple of my permanents, Oko, Elk your Ulamog. Then they went Caracas, bounce my Elk, Ulamog. So let me tell you about Magic that's being played these days compared to when Counterbalance was good. Counterbalance doesn't do shit against anything that I just described. And neither does Oko or anything. So, it's a very different world out there.
Yeah, but in 2020, you could be playing Arkham's Astrolabe with Back to Basics in your 5-color control deck.
Yeah, it's a different kind of thing that's happening.
All right.
All right,
Enough
so we should probably
reflecting
talk
on
more
the
about
past.
synergies. All right, so there's this other sort of deck that I might have been known to play once or twice, where you can play a lot of bad cards that are situationally good, and sometimes the more you lean in, the more you can see your deck improve based on these cards. And for me, it's Chrome Mox. Back during the Miracles heyday, I tried getting away with only playing 2 and sort of being more like Ad Nauseam Tendrils, where my deck had a better late game. But what I found was when I leaned more heavily into Chrome Mox and when I went up to 4, I was winning more games because I was winning games before my opponent got counterbalanced top into play. And sometimes that's what you need. And it's tough because sometimes people will tell you otherwise when, like, you might say, my win rate's higher when I play 4 copies of this card, but you'll discuss it with your peers and they're like, yeah, well, that card sucks, you shouldn't play it. And sometimes you just have to trust your gut a little bit and then keep on looking at the data. Because trust me, I read a lot of what people say online about like deck construction, things like that. And I'm in the Storm Discord and like I still read MTG The Source every once in a while. And they'll be like, but every time I draw a Chrome Mox, I want to puke. Well, you can run Ant and have a 35% win percentage, or you can play the Epic Storm and get up to 60-something% and accept that Chrome Mox isn't always the best top deck. But when you reveal it to Ad Nauseam, you want to pump fist. Like there's gives and takes. And sometimes you just have to accept a card's role for what it is rather than disliking it for what it's not.
Yeah, I had a game in the Gen Con when I played the Muxus Stompy where my opponent had gained like tenuous parity against my early start. And like I had so many draws like Muxus, Ringleader, Matron, like any of these, the Goblin payoffs to just bust the game open. And I drew Chrome Mox, and then I drew Chrome Mox. And then my opponent blind Cabal therapied me and named Chrome Mox because I mean they very smartly deduced that the Goblin deck didn't play a land or a creature for the last 2 turns, what could be in their hand. And then they cast Jace, plussed on me, apologized in the chat, and I drew Chrome Mox. And like that felt pretty bad. But I also cast like a number of turn 3 and 4 Muxus during that event. So Chrome Mox giveth and taketh away.
Yeah, that's just the best way to describe it. Like I've lived a lot of the red prison life, and like when you draw these Chrome Mox and these Spirit Guides end game, it's like this is a little rough. But then like you get so many wins off of the tempo that you gain by having this mana acceleration that the trade-off is certainly worth it.
Phil, do you know how many times I've had turn 1 Karn cast against me in the last 2 weeks? It's a lot, and I fucking hate it. And every single time that it happens to me, I laugh a little bit inside because I think to people that are like, Chrome Mox sucks. Meanwhile, my opponent went Lotus Petal Chrome Mox Karn, and I'm sitting there hating myself. So, I don't know.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of like very good fast artifact decks within, I don't know, the last 2 or 3 years. Like Lotus Petal and Friends, and Chrome Moxen have been accelerating out all sorts of dumb stuff, from like the Zerda stuff to the Urza stuff to the Karn stuff, to the like White Eldrazi style prison stuff. Like the card is very good, and you can't necessarily shove it into everything. Like if you tell me you want to shove a Chrome Mox or 4 into Delver, I'd probably look at you with a raised eyebrow. But I'd still be willing to listen to your madman talk.
I believe a lot of this started to happen when Mox Opal started being experimented with. It happened around the same time for like the Epic Storm Bomberman and a couple prison decks, where decks started trying out Mox Opal to pair with some of their faster stuff, and that's when you started seeing the more explosive, sometimes even combo-y prison decks start to emerge.
Yeah, like a card like Chrome Mox, that you have to look at your macro plan, which is to go fast. Like, there are lots of ways to get ahead by 1 mana in Magic. Like, and most decks, like Miracles, I would put Rampant Growth in my Miracles deck before I play Chrome Mox, because it's not a -1 for 0. You know, like, at Chrome Mox, you have to be spewing something hard and fast to get the payoff of the card disadvantage that you're causing yourself, and you're diluting your deck with all these shitty top decks. Like, that has to be in a deck that's trying to get things done.
Why do you have to use the word shitty, Brian? Huh?
Is what it is.
All right, so kind of returning back to the ninja side of the discussion for a minute. Part of what was making ninjas strong is that it uses these various pieces very well together in all sorts of different ways. And because it has these multiple synergistic angles that are all slightly different, it creates something that's strong. But there are a lot of legacy decks, especially on the lower end of the tier spectrum, that try to use synergy and don't really do enough, and the deck ends up being really weak. I play a lot of these. There are a lot of these, like, A plus B combo decks, where A is sketchy and B is sketchy, and A and B don't interact with the rest of the deck at all, and the rest of the deck is just held together by reasonable cards. And you just end up playing a worse version of some other deck, because you haven't actually created enough synergy to make it worth playing, the quote-unquote bad cards in your deck.
Well, I think that's I don't want to say a problem, but a deck building problem within Legacy is so often I'll see an A plus B deck, and the first thought I have to myself is, why is this better than Show and Tell? And there's a certain ceiling in Legacy where your A plus B combo deck has to be at least as good as X, where X is another deck in the format. And I've watched some of your streams, Phil. You're a brave soul. That's what I'll have to say about that. But when it comes to deck building, you have to be doing something better than something else in order for it to be worthwhile. And sometimes you just have to get those synergies to work well together enough to do it. Like, I've reinvented the Epic Storm at least 3 times in the last 10 years. Like, I'm still not playing Gold Lands and Silences anymore. For a while, the Epic Storm was a 4 Empty the Warrens Cabal Therapy deck based on synergy. And now it's a Wishclaw Talisman Artifact deck. So sometimes you just have to find your own niche.
So, do you all remember the older version of ninjas before, like, Ingenious Infiltrator, where they were playing a bunch of, like, cute big things that you could happen to rip with Yuriko?
Like the 11 mana Time Walk with Delve?
Is it 11?
I saw that.
11?
Maybe it's 9?
I'm thinking of the Miracle one. Temporal Mastery.
Temporal Mastery. 7 mana.
Here, I'm
Are
just going to look it up.
Stretch? It costs 12?
No, dude. You're way off. This was in Khan's block. Temporal... It's Temporal something. Temporal Extortion? Nope.
Distortion?
You guys can keep talking. I'm going to try to find it.
Too late.
Alright, anyway. The old Ninjas deck used to play a bunch of, like, big BS that it could rip with Yuriko, and if that happened, it was just, like, gross, disgusting, like, pump your fist in the air, you got them. And so there used to be a bunch of things in there, like Gurmag Angler, Temporal Mastery. Sometimes people would, like, go real deep, and they'd put, like, Vile Smasher the Fierce into this Yuriko deck as well to, like, really try to mise with these expensive cards. And it just was janky, because so often you just ended up with a bad card in your hand, and it, like, wasn't in the right spot, it wasn't in the right zone, you didn't have it with your synergy enabler because you didn't have enough of them, and the deck ends up just being awkward. And now the Ninjas deck has just kind of cut most of the... I was going to say most of the crap, but, like, most of the extraneous stuff in order to just make a really tight core.
Temporal Trespass. That's the card.
Ah.
It's an 11 mana Time Walk with Delve. It's blue 8 Delve, take an extra turn. I have had that card flipped off Yuriko at me before. Continue.
Yeah.
So I think another one of these decks where when you look at it, you go, well, the whole has to be greater than the sum of its parts. And it had a very strong showing this past weekend at the Legacy Showcase, which would be Hogak. I know we're supposed to be talking about ninjas or something, but I think when you look at a deck like Hogak, it's actually a better synergy-based deck than something like Ninjas, because the entire deck is literally just all synergy other than the lands, when you look at a card like Stitcher Supplier, that's not exactly a very strong legacy card either. I'd probably rather play that than Changeling Outcast personally. But when you pair it with Hogak, Bridge from Below, Vengevine, all these other cards, the GAC deck, I mean, that's what it is. It's very powerful, but none of the cards are actually that good.
Yeah, that might even be a better example, honestly. Like, how many cards that are in the Hogak deck actually see play elsewhere? It's not that many. Like,
I was looking at the list that recently did well. It's running Putrid Dip, and believe it or not, Judgment All-Star Hapless Researcher.
hey, that card has seen plenty of legacy love.
Maybe in 2009, Blue-Black Reanimator.
I remember watching SCG Tour, or whatever they were called at that time, matches, and seeing that on camera.
That little wizard did work. But the deck's very similar to Dredge. Like, when you look at Dredge, outside of Lion's Eye Diamond, that deck doesn't really have any crossover.
Yeah, I think that, like, applying this to Hogak is, like, just the closer you are to a combo deck, the more of these weirdo cards you're going to have. Like, I think we were so inspired by Retrofitter Foundry because it's in an otherwise fair mid-range blue deck. Like, obviously, like, Storm's going to have some weirdo cards in it that wouldn't be in Miracles. And, like, Show and Tell is going to play a card that Dredge isn't going to play, and Dredge is going to be full of weirdo cards. Hogak's going to be full of weirdo cards. And they all play roles, and it's just really, really fascinating when somebody finds a way to wiggle a combo. Like, and it's not even like World Gorger Dragon, where you're a control deck with an actual combo finish. This is like a purely synergy-driven value combo. Just this one-card engine that turns your whole deck on. And that's just really brilliant to see that in such a fair deck.
I also think that, like, Ninjas is kind of a cool... I don't know that I really want to call it a breakout deck, because it's been slowly building for a little while now, but it's super cool to see this sort of deck having success in current Legacy. Like, it's something that isn't playing a bunch of the, like, current offenders of the format that people really tend to dislike, like Astrolabe and that sort of stuff. Like, it's got, like, an Oko in there, but it's really just like a little treat Oko. It's not an Oko-centric deck. I don't know. I like this deck a lot.
Yeah, my Ninjas League is my most watched YouTube video by a lot in my recent posts. Like, the people love it. The YouTube algorithm loves it, I guess, sharing it to new people. But yeah, people just keep clicking because they see Ninjas. They love it.
Yeah, I'm streaming with it tomorrow
So there
night.
was a screenshot that was shared on Twitter where somebody tweeted out the top 4 or 5 decks in Legacy, and the first one was Rug Delver, second one was Ninjas, third one was Goblins, and the fourth one was Elves. All the percentages for the decks were cropped off, and it was within the last 14 days. I think Goldfish is actually a little bit of, I don't know how I want to choose my words here, but, like, not exactly telling the truth for actual, like, Legacy metagame shares anymore, especially depending on how you filter it. Because, like, the Saturday morning challenges are, like, 40 people, sometimes even less. And also, you publish preliminary results, which are barely firing now. And then you have challenge results. Something like Ninjas that has, like, 5 appearances could have the same person piloting in 3 different events in 1 week get published 3 times, and all of a sudden your deck's in second place. Because when you looked at the actual percentages on that screenshot, it was like 26 results from Rug Delver, 7 from Ninjas, 5 from Goblins, 4 from Elves, and then everything else in the deck was 3 over the last 14 days. And it looks a little bit misrepresenting, but, like, then people see the screenshot and they're like, oh, well, I want to play Ninjas now. Which is fine, because Ninjas is a perfectly acceptable deck in 2020. But I think sometimes people get in their mind a little bit too strongly about how good these decks are based on some of these screenshots or the Goldfish data in general.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who works with statistics for a living knows that or has studied them in any way. The first thing you learn is how to do them. The second thing you learn is how to lie with them. And then the third thing you learn is how to spot lies with statistics. Like it's very easy to present numbers, which are supposed to be impartial arbiters of what is true, as in misleading ways without lying. Like there's tons of ways to do it. That's how like political structures work. Like it is done all the time. And like you said, if Goldfish just like, if the algorithm just farms 3 lists from the same person over 3 different days, like, and now their deck is in second place, that can happen. So you need a little bit of research. I wouldn't just open up the Goldfish page and pretend to be an expert on the Legacy metagame.
Yeah. In current Legacy, I trust my gut more than I trust the data. That's like very much not been the case historically. But right now, I feel like I kind of know where Legacy is at. I know what I'm seeing. And like sometimes I look at the data that I'm seeing for things, and my image of Legacy and what I'm seeing based on the data don't mesh. And when I see that disconnect, I tend to err on the side of like trusting my play experience more.
Yeah, I've held this position for well over a decade, and it's that you are a maniac if you try to metagame Legacy. Like, you should know what the best decks are, you should have a plan for them, but if you're, like, trying to cover everything, or if, like, your decision comes down to, like, I can gain 2% against blue, but I lose 3% against combo, or whatever, like, with a sideboard slot, just play what you want to play, because everyone else is going to do the same thing. And I've spent so many hours of my life agonizing over that 15th sideboard slot in Delver, and it barely matters. Like, you want to run a good deck, but like honestly, you can like pour over MTG Top 8 and Goldfish and like all of the leagues and be like, oh my god, Delver is so popular, I should play a blue elemental blast. And then you just get paired against Stompy 6 times. Like, it is what it is. It's Legacy. So
I will say this. I generally agree with you, Brian, but this past weekend in the showcase, the people that chose to play Hogak were brilliant. Because when I look at my personal data structure, I faced it, I believe the number was 6 times since the banning of Loris. When you look at the like long-term Goldfish data, because you can filter up to 30 and 45 days, Hogak was nowhere to be found. And then this weekend, like 5 or 6 people chose to play it out of the blue, and it just crushed everyone playing Rug Delver. Like, everyone's known the entire time that Hogak beats Rug Delver, but this weekend, people were afraid of playing combo because of Rug Delver, and more people played Rug Delver, and then Gak just came out of nowhere and killed everyone.
Yeah, I mean, there are, like, broad stroke metagame calls you can make, like, bold decisions. Like, it's always been said that this truism is as old as the format. It's like, Dredge is the best when Dredge is the worst. And it's like, when everyone knows, like, everyone is ready for Dredge, therefore we can drop our hate, now it's time. Like, this is the week. And these people pick their spot. And it's, like, kind of a smallish field, what, like 40 people, you said? And was this the showcase?
The showcase was like 200. Okay,
so, and, like, the Magic Online metagame is, like, try hard by nature, because there's no gathering, it's only Magic. Like, the only reason to play Magic Online, really, is, like, for, a little bit of fun, but mostly to farm tickets. And maybe that's controversial, but I get no personal joy out of playing Magic Online compared to playing paper Magic. And, like, nobody's going to show up with just some whack-a-noodle deck. Like,
not in a serious
unless it's
event.
Phil.
Like, even
right.
I, like, crazy man that I am, like, when it comes to, like, actually, like, playing in a Legacy Challenge or a showcase or something, like, I played Death and Taxes, I played Red Prison. I don't know that I've ever submitted a deck other than those two for a serious tournament.
Right. Like, you can YOLO a league and, like, you're out $10, but you have a sweet video or a sweet stream if you're a content creator, or you tried something fun that was worth $10 if you're not. But, like, if you make it to the Legacy Showcase, you're going to be playing Rug Delver or something with a plan to beat it, basically. And that's exactly the spot where you just shove in Hogak and hope it works. But there was, like, a good chance that, like, maybe the pairings don't work out, and even though Rug Delver is 40% of the field, you play against, like, Miracles twice, you just get your shit terminused, and then you're out of the tournament. And Rug Delver is in the top 8. So there's just like you have to have a really solid meta call. You have to go deep into it. Like these people played Hogak. They didn't like put some Abrupt Decays in their deck, you know? Like that's not their plan for Rug Delver. They are on Hogak. They threw the whole 75 in the trash and brought Hogak. Like they committed to a thing, and they were right this time, and they got the pairings they wanted.
So what kind of deck building would you call adding in some Abrupt Decays, for example, over like a card like Massacre? What kind of deck building is that?
I would call that role filling.
Oh, well, seeing as I'm Phil, I guess I'll start that section. All right.
Yep, fill it up, Earl.
So, when we're talking about role filling and deck building, we're talking about what specific cards are there for. And Abrupt Decay is a classic example of a card that does everything. If you think of the problems in Legacy right now, Abrupt Decay answers most of them. It is just a generic workhorse card. But then there are more specific, more narrow, more powerful cards. Like take something like Massacre. If you are bringing a Massacre to the table, you know what you are looking to kill. You are looking to kill a lot of shitty white creatures at the same time, and you are looking to crush a poor man's soul. Like, that's what you're trying to do with that card.
Thalia had it coming.
I sure did. So did Thalia, so did Aethersworn Canonist, and Mother of Runes, and basically most of the creatures that I play. Alright, so when you're playing with one of these cards like Massacre that's specific, it's very powerful, and when you play it, it probably wins you the game, or at least has a very high impact on a game. Whereas when you play an Abrupt Decay, it's just kind of a spell, right? It's a good spell, but like one Abrupt Decay probably does not make or break most games, at least early on. But one Massacre, like, you killed that poor player. They're done. Pack them up. Go to game 3.
Phil, would you believe that there was an event in my life where I ran 2 Massacres?
I would. That's the kind of person you are. And then again, like, I'm the kind of person who, like, started throwing Chalice and D&T and all sorts of other decks where it didn't belong, so, like, we both have done terrible things to each other, but we can still be here and talk as friends, so it's fine at the end of the day. Anyway, when you play these niche cards that have low flexibility, they have high specificity, right? So, for example, let's say that you bring something like Boil to a tournament. Like, when you are registering, like, Boil or Tsunami, you know what your life is about, you know what you're trying to beat, you know what matchups those cards are for, but they're not very flexible, right? So when you're thinking about your deck building, you need to think, like, do I need a flexible card? Do I need a specific card? What are these cards trying to do? What sort of roles are they trying to fill? So, like, Brian, for example, you played a lot of, like, blue fair decks. Like, how do you decide what cards you're slotting in at a given time? Do you want to, like, talk about something like that?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I just, after our long rant about metagaming, like, this is the kind of tuning that knowing what the best deck is about will help you. Like, if I have 2 slots left over in my main deck, I have 58 cards registered in whatever Monastery Mentor blue shell I've put together this week. Like, I'll look at the top decks, and it's like, what are people putting into play? Like, is Chalice of the Void popular right now? I might want Council's Judgment in that slot. Are people trying to interact on the stack? Are we playing tons of blue mirrors? Like, this might be a Teferi or a Narset kind of thing. Is it Rug Delver? Give me 2 Supreme Verdicts. Just put them in. Like, that's the kind of role-playing I'm interested in. And it can get weird. It's like, if you need to answer a variety of things at a certain speed, like Merit Lage, generally you can't answer that at sorcery speed and still plan to win the game. So maybe you need Unexpectedly Absent is a card that I've registered. I know Bryant has made fun of that card before on this podcast, but for 2 mana, you can remove a permanent from play. And if you have extra mana laying around, you can do more with it. Like, that's like the Abrupt Decay versus Massacre situation. Like, Supreme Verdict is not going to stop Merit Lage, but it's going to stop Delver in its tracks. Unexpectedly Absent will tuck that Tarmogoyf and it'll tuck that Merit Lage, but it'll leave the Dreadhorde Arcanist and the Delver in play too, unfortunately. So that's just, what kind of role are you trying to fill with your slots?
I've played a lot of things like Celestial Purge in the sideboard, where like
I love that card.
On the surface, it's like, man, why is that in your deck? And then you go like, well, this week I need to be concerned about like Bob and Liliana of the Veil and Gurmag Angler and Merit Lodge all at the same time, and it just like makes
and Blood Moon,
and Blood Moon and Sulfuric Vortex and Dreadhorde. Yeah, like when Legacy, I think probably like a year and a half ago at the winter SCG Con, Harlan Fear and I were both working on various blue-white shells, like Stoneforge Mystic decks. I guess this was around GP Niagara, actually. So we're going back a little bit. And we were both working hard on like blue-white shells with Stoneforge Mystic, and I was just on Celestial Purge. And we had talked about it a little bit. We went back and forth. He was like, I don't know. I'm like, I think it's good. And then he tried it once, and he was just on it until Legacy shifted again. Like, that was just one of those cards that in that moment where like you had to answer like Merit Lage and Blood Moon on the reg. That's exactly what you want.
So this is something that Bryant and I have both brought up a few times, but we both have boxes of like the Plan C cards where like they're not the cards that are usually good, but like every once in a while you need to reach back for the tech, and like it's so good to have those reserves of cards. Like I've registered Brian has gotten up in order to get his own reserve box, I think.
Speaking of what Phil is talking about, I dug back last year pretty deep, and I brought back Crash. At the time, Chalice decks were really popping up everywhere, and Crash seemed like the perfect answer. It wasn't a sorcery for Burning Wish, but it allowed me to answer a Chalice on turn 1 while not slowing me down in a point in time where I felt like Legacy had sped up quite a bit, and cards like Echoing Truth and Abrupt Decay were too slow, so running Chain of Vapor and Crash allowed me to get around these first turn Chalices a little bit more often.
I also have such a thing. When Phil started talking, I ran behind me and grabbed it. I'm holding it up for the camera now. This is the Elves binder. I have just a binder full of foil cards that could conceivably be in Elves. Just flipping through this binder, Thrun the Last Troll, Elder Scale Worm, Crozen Grip, Loaming Shaman, Vengevine, Yeva Nature's Herald, Creeping Corrosion, Azuri Renegade Leader, Ren's Run Packmaster, Fairy Macabre, Marsh Casualties. Like, these are the sort of things that I have that could conceivably be put into an Elves deck.
I remember Azuri and Elves. Like, it was a big deal at the time.
Do you remember Packmaster and Elves? That was the golden era. Oh my god. Shardless Bug was so popular. This was the Eternal Extravaganza that I chopped the finals of. It was a 40 duels tournament. I chopped the finals for 30 duels. And I remember when I knew I was going to do well in the tournament, it was like round 4 of 8. And I was playing against Shardless Bug. And I cast Green Sun Zenith for 4. And they were like, what are you going to get with that? And I was like, you're not going to like it. And then I slammed the Packmaster. It tucked an Elvish Visionary. And then they just died to it. Like, just pooped out Elves. It has Death Touch. It's a 5/5. It costs 4. Like, there's nothing they could do to touch it. Like, that was the golden age. I love it.
I missed that.
I thought for sure you were going to list the white changeling that Elves used to play, and then you
Mirror Entity?
Yeah.
Well, that's just completely obsolete, unfortunately. Though Mortar Pod is still in this binder from when Mirror Entity was the kill. I'm sure I've told this story before, but there was a time I was playing Elves versus Sneak and Show. It was against Brad Nelson, and we had this crazy back and forth game. I had like a Caracas to slow him down. He had like a Pyroclasm to brick me, and we got into this like scrappy nickel and dime game. And on the last turn, he tapped his Ancient Tomb from 3 life to cast Show and Tell, and I put in Mortar Pod and pinged him for the death. So, Mortar Pod has killed Brad Nelson in Legacy. Let it be known.
I miss that era of Legacy. Like, that was the era of, like, sideboarding weird shit that absolutely destroyed people. Like,
Manriki
Manriki
Gusari.
Gusari. Wiltleaf Liege was another great one from that era. Like, oh man, Liliana's everywhere. Liliana of the Vale at that time. Like, Lily plus Wiltleaf Liege. Oh god, everything is awful.
So I think there's part of what people like to discuss about that, and that's power creep. But I think realistically, another thing that happened is Legacy became a more competitive format due to the SCG Tour. Because it used to be like you would get one Grand Prix a year, and people would be like, I don't know, what was good in Standard last year? Stoneforge Mystic? Okay, so let's get our Batterskull. How do you beat Batterskull? Manriki Gusari. But then SCG picked up Legacy, and the format evolved pretty quickly after that. And you saw a lot of these like weird strategies sort of just fall by the wayside. Like you didn't really see people playing like mono green cloud post anymore for a very long time, or just like the random stuff you would see at smaller events. A lot of that sort of just went away, and as the format kept on moving, you'd see more and more Delver shells and miracles and things like that, and less of the fun stuff you used to see.
I think part of that is just the nature of how card printings have changed. Maybe from like RTR forward, like we started getting much more flexible threats and answers. We got things like Abrupt Decay and Council's Judgment and Rest in Peace, where they just end up being a lot more flexible and good across the board. So there's less of a need to play some of the niche narrow things than there used to be. I don't know. Maybe that's not entirely true, but that probably at least partially plays into it.
Yeah, and power creep is non-zero. Like, that's the nature of Eternal formats. Modern is hitting, like, a kind of legacy size. Like, obviously, it'll never catch up because that's not how linear time works. But, like, where the size Modern is now is probably close to the size Legacy was when I started. And, like, when cards get printed, they trickle off into the Eternal formats. That's just how it works. That's the point. So something like Mirror Entity and Elves just getting completely obsoleted by the printing of Craterhoof Behemoth. Like, we get to cut a color and we have like a better way to win the game. Like that, sure, deal. Like that's just how it works sometimes.
And now it's Allosaurus Rider, a card you can green Sun Zenith for 1.
Shepherd, clown.
I did that twice now.
Honestly, I think the people who say Allosaurus Rider is probably close to 90%. Like every YouTube thing I watch, everyone who tweets, every podcast I listen to, Allosaurus Rider, 90%. And when they mean Shepherd.
I am the 90%.
You are. You're just crawling around in the mud.
All right, so I mentioned Rest in Peace. That brings me back to another point that I wanted to make. So when you're thinking about the tools that your 75 has access to, you need to think about what you need. Do you need the more specific card? Do you need the more flexible card? So Graveyard Hate is a great option where you have things like Rest in Peace, Surgical Extraction, Nihil Spellbomb, Grafdigger's Cage, Fairy Macabre, and you get to think, which one of these do I want to be playing? Do I want the generically hyper-flexible Rest in Peace that's slow? Do I want Surgical that's fast and flexible? Do I want Fairy Macabre that is like a questionable legacy card at best, but is really, really good against Red-Black Reanimator? Like, there's all sorts of different angles of attack that you can use for something like Graveyard Hate.
Yes.
And that works like the same way as I was talking about, like your Council's Judgment, Unexpectedly Absent, Supreme Verdict slot. Like, what do you need your deck to do? Like, a deck that can win on turn 4, it just needs to survive turn 3, probably wants something like Surgical Extraction, where it can just like clip the problem, buy that breathing room, get the job done. Something like Miracles, where the game's gonna go long, your opponent's gonna have time to find the answer to whatever you play, you need to shut it down, they're gonna want to Rest in Peace. And like, then there's Grafdigger's Cage, which also is splash damage against Elves, but it's worse against Dredge because they can still fill the graveyard. Then when they do answer your cage, things can get dicey quickly. Like, there's a lot of things to manage, and it's just what does your deck need to be doing?
One of the better things you can do in these situations is don't just play one of these effects, play a few of them. So if you can, maybe if you're playing something like Surgical Extraction, you could also instead or complement it with something like Leyline of the Void, which seems crazy. But if you have two very different ways of combating a specific thing that you're trying to do, your opponent has a very difficult time of answering back. So if they know that you have Leyline, they could board in Wear Terror. I don't know. Maybe that's not the best example.
Reverent Silence.
Reverent Silence. And then they can destroy your Leyline, but they're going to get crushed by that Surgical Extraction if they think that you only have Leyline. So if you hit them with the old 1-2, there's probably no way of recovering.
Yep. And I can tell you from a lot of experience, the best is when you hit them with both, where you just like have the turn 2 rest in peace. They do a bunch of crap and like spew a bunch of resources to answer it. And then they go for it and you surgical them. Like that's like it looks like a dead card, but if you're playing a deck that's going to play a long game, the opponent's going to find the answer. You're going to need a second wave. So like just like pop, shut them down.
So this is the sort of thing that makes me really appreciate like the Strifopile deck, the 4-color punishing deck. Like that's a card that has so many different like slightly different situational cards that all do similar but slightly different things, and you never know which piece of interaction you're going to be facing in a specific game, and that makes it like even harder to play against those sorts of decks and adds to the unpredictability. It's kind of its own advantage.
Yeah, definitely. Like the check pile deck too, back when at the end of Deathrite Shaman's reign. Like, that deck just had all of your favorite cards from 4 different colors in it in numbers between, like, 1 and 3. So it's just like, I could play around Pyroblast and Force of Will, but I'm going to get got by Flusterstorm, and you just could never win. But if I try to play around all of it, they're going to get me with their one Thoughtseize. So it's just, like, there's a lot to be said about diversifying what you're doing.
This section was originally titled Role Filling when you're deck building, and it's not exactly Synergy, which was our first section, but I have an example of Rite of Flame in the Epic Storm. Recently, as in like within the last month or so, I was trying a list without any Rite of Flames. I was just running 8 Moxen because they were all Synergy-based cards, and I was just trying to turbo out my ad nauseums all the time. Which, in theory, in a vacuum, this is a good plan. Well, the problem with that is decks don't always like work in this perfect vacuum where you're trying to do A, so you A into B, and then, you know, you get C. There's like role filling cards, and Rite of Flame in the Epic Storm is that, because when you don't have a card like Rite of Flame in your deck, you don't actually make that much mana. Like, you can Mox Opal, you can Rite of Flame, but now you're down 3 cards and you need 2 mana. So if you ever get your effects like Dark Ritual or Lion's Eye Diamond Surgical, your deck can draw 15 cards and make like 6 mana. So that's not always the best thing that you can be doing. And I think that there's a lot of like role-playing cards in some of these decks, even ninjas, for example. Like, I've already forgotten the name of it. The 4-mana ninja, Ingenious
Infiltrator.
There we go. Like, that's a role filler to me. Like, it's not exactly your Yuriko that's bringing it home. It's not your Changeling Outcast. It's like that sort of the middle of the road card that's sort of like, it's secretly the core of the deck, even though it doesn't look like it. It could have been Ninja of the Deep Hours, but this card is better in your deck. It fits that role a little bit better.
It's amazing how good it is to draw 1 additional card each turn in Legacy. That's something we haven't like explicitly stated tonight, but like when you have cards like Force of Negation and Force of Will in your deck that like cause you to 2 for 1, you do need to recoup some of that card advantage over time. I played a league with a very questionable deck the other day that happened to include some ninjas in it. And let me tell you, when those things were protected and I was just getting to connect with them every turn, the game snowballs. And so, though the card might look weak on paper, when it builds towards an engine and that engine gets established, that oftentimes becomes unbeatable. And then your card that looks weak on the surface isn't weak anymore. It's the thing getting you the trophy.
Yeah, when I'm drawing 2 cards per turn off my Changeling Outcast and my Ingenious Infiltrator, you can make fun of me all you want. You're going to lose. Like that's just magic.
So, Brian, I know you've also been playing around with some sharks recently. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I love me some sharks. Yeah, so my first pass at a Shark Still deck, I was just like 4 Shark Typhoons, 4 Standstills, Hall of Heliod's, Generosity. What else do we do here? And then I quickly adopted some ancient technology, which was Crucible of Worlds and Wasteland in my standstill deck, which that's like almost as old as the format itself. Like when Legacy was born from 1.5, I think people were already doing this or very close to it. So, and I love one or two Wastelands in a control deck. Like that just gets my engine started. So I didn't see anyone else doing this, and I just shoved 2 Wastelands and a Crucible of Worlds into this deck. And I guess I should take a step back. My first thought was nobody else can get back their Hall of Heliod's Generosity if it gets Wastelanded. And that's basically this deck's entire endgame. So what do I want to do about that? How can I get this back? And Crucible of Worlds came to mind. And I was like, okay, I can't just play Crucible in case my Hall gets Wastelanded. That's insane. So I just put 2 Wastelands of my own in. And now we have this sweet little package. And I have this sweet little package, but somebody commented on one of my YouTube videos and asked about putting Mystic Sanctuary in this deck. And that's the question there is, what role is that filling? So I've chosen to use these techie land slots for Wasteland. And because of the 2 Wastelands, the Hall of Heliod's Generosity, and the basic planes, that's 5 non-island lands in my deck. So if I also put a Mystic Sanctuary in there, that could be up to 6 lands that don't produce blue when I need them to in this deck. And with the Crucible endgame, you don't need something like Mystic Sanctuary to buy back your spells. Your lands are buying back your spells for you. So I could totally see a different build of this deck that doesn't have the Crucible, doesn't have the Wastelands, just plays 2 Mystic Sanctuaries and more islands overall, and that would probably be a good deck too. But I have chosen to fill that role one way, and someone else might choose completely reasonably to fill it in a different way. And like that, I thought that was a pretty interesting discussion that came up in my YouTube comments.
As an aside to that, I think people get too greedy in their flex land slots in Legacy in general. I see a lot of Death and Taxes players do this in particular. So Death and Taxes is a mono white deck that like really technically isn't playing enough white sources in the first place to cast all of its spells on curve.
It's really not.
It's bad. I've done the math behind it. It's very sketchy. And then I see a lot of these Death and Taxes players doing things like, I'm going to throw in like 1 Ghost Quarter and 1 Mishra's Factory into my list. And those are taking away slots that would have been additional white sources. Or they're doing things like, I'm going to put a Flagstones in my list. I've got a 1 of Cataclysm in the board. I'll maybe get some value. And then you get like Blood Moon and Wastelanded and back to basics. Like, basic planes are good. Your basic lands are so good. You don't need to get cute with your flex slots. Like, a lot of times, your lands really are contributing to your game plan in some way. And when you're trying to get too cute with adding utility into your deck, you sometimes end up hurting yourself greatly.
Yeah, you've all heard me play this song before, but basic lands are like functionally indestructible in a format that's all about gathering resources. Like that's it. Like the basic land in Legacy is just an absolute treasure that not enough people use. And to support your point, the number of games that I've won against my opponent who goes like Rishadan-Port Aether Vial, and I force it, and then they go like Wasteland, Rishadan-Port Ghost Quarter, dead. And then they just lose. Like, that has happened enough times that like the number of planes in that deck is just already tenuous. So getting greedy, like Mystic Sanctuary is not a free card to put in your blue deck. It's just not, especially if you're playing basic planes. So like you need to think about these things big picture when you're putting your deck together.
I'd like to circle back to something. You said you received this as a YouTube comment?
I did.
How come you get constructive or at least like somewhat intelligent YouTube comments where all I get is please upload more modern content? Because I've gotten 2 more of those this week and I'm just going to start replying like fuck you on each and every one of them.
Or maybe you could do more modern content. Listen, give the people what they want.
If they want to watch modern, they can go watch Caleb Schur. Great guy. He's a terrific Storm player, loves playing Modern Storm. Go watch him. Leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, so I honestly, I'm not sure, but I'm sure we could do a whole segment that I'm not trying to derail us today on about like community building. But when people comment on my YouTube videos, unless it's just complete like horse's ass stuff, I do respond. Like any idea that is in the realm of sanity, where like, to me, obviously, like, I don't want Mystic Sanctuary in this deck. Like, I don't have the islands to support it. I don't need it for my plan, etc. Like, that makes sense to me. I built the deck. But I can see why someone might think that, and that's a good thing to engage with. And I've heard much worse ideas than that presented to me in those comments, and I always try to reply and say, like, oh, hey, good thought, but here's why. And I like to think that fostering that sort of back and forth pays off next month for my next video when someone has a thought and they want to share it. So there's that. That might be it. I'm probably less prickly than you in general.
I think I'm going to subscribe to your YouTube channel, ask you to make more Storm content.
I honestly, I don't know how I've survived this long without posting a Storm League, because that deck is in my range. I have played it in tournaments, and people would probably like it. So I should probably just go ahead. I have it on Magic Online. Like, I have the Epic Storm. I keep up with whatever your latest list is, and I always just have it ready. I just never actually do it.
Elves is just Green Storm.
I know. I was gonna play one. I was gonna do one Elves Day during Gen Con, when Gen Con also gave everyone God accounts. Like, if you signed up for the event, you just got Moto unlocked 4x everything for the week. It was pretty dope. That's how I got to play Muxus Stompy. But I'm gonna have to scrounge up some Allosaurus Shepherds to play Elves. I was gonna do that during Gen Con, but then decided after getting crushed with my brainstormless deck on Friday, I didn't want to do that again on Saturday. So I just won all my matches with ninjas instead. So but Elves are coming.
This is actually on topic and has to do with Elves. Recently, I've been playing a lot of Magic Online. I've taken this week sort of off from Legacy. I kind of got burned out grinding. But the previous week, I was facing a lot of Elves, and they all went back to running Nettle Sentinel. And I was like, that's a card I haven't seen in a while. More of in the combo-y sort of Elf shells. I'd say in the last 6 months, people are playing the Hello Newton style Elves that are running Elvish Reclaimer instead of Nettle Sentinel. And it's just been coming back, and I'm wondering if Allosaurus Shepherd has changed the way that Elves is structured a little bit, where people want to be a little bit more combo-y now, rather than maybe being, more of a mid-range deck with natural order.
For what it's worth, I think in general that the switch to Elvish Reclaimer Elves was just a net decking problem. I think that Newton is just a genius with Elves and could win doing anything, and that's what he was doing, and other people copied his list. And I tried his list once, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me, because again, we're talking about role players. The switch from Nettle Sentinel to Elvish Reclaimer is a fundamental change of the plan of that deck. And it changes everything. It cascades all of your decision trees from that point, from your turn, from your one drop. Everything is different. And I struggled with that deck to try to figure out the right lines. And Newton is very smart. He knew what he was doing. He built the deck. So good for him. But I think that there was always a perfectly viable combo Elves version. I just don't know if enough people were exploring Elves. But Allosaurus Shepherd, just making all your shit uncounterable, makes it pretty easy to want to be a combo deck.
Well, I think that's a larger issue with Legacy, if we're okay with talking about it in this episode. But I think people don't explore enough in Legacy.
We know. Yeah, we know.
I've said it a million times. It just drives me nuts.
Yes, every episode we talk about this. I don't think we need
shut up
to
now.
Rehash it completely. But yeah, so anyway, talking about role fillers, since that's what this section is, I had an experience in Vintage and Gen Con when I played Hogak that Cabal Therapy sucks in that deck. The role that Cabal Therapy plays in graveyard decks traditionally, in Dredge, it's an all-star. In old Grixis Delver, comboing off with your Young Pyromancer and Gitaxian Probe. Those decks were great at using Cabal Therapy. And you would think, like, my deck doesn't make a lot of mana, it's a Bazaar Baghdad deck, casting disruptive spells out of my graveyard for free is a good deal. But the way that Hogak is structured in Vintage is that you normally, like, you activate your Bazaar, you discard a Vengevine, you cast a Basking Rootwalla and a Hollow One. You now have Vengevine, Basking Rootwalla, Hollow One in play, and that's what you have to win with. That's it. Like, there's not a second wave. It's really hard when you're activating Bazaar Baghdad to get enough cards in your hand to create a second wave. That's just a function of how that card works. And it's not like Dredge where you can just tap it recklessly and fill your graveyard and things are going to be okay. It's just a totally different thing. So if you have 3 creatures that you've produced on turn 1, it's their job to get the game over, and you sack one of them to Cabal Therapy, like, that's not a good deal. And in Vintage, all the best cards are restricted. Like, you have no way to look at their hand. Are you just going to, like, fucking guess? Like, hope you don't have Ancestral Recall. Goodbye, Basking Rootwalla. Now my clock is 2 turns slower. Like, it was just such a bad card in a shell that seemed like it would love to have it.
Well, they are running Stitcher Supplier. I would just like to clarify that. But I agree with you. Like, every time the card is cast against me, I laugh a little bit because I know for a fact they're either naming Force of Will or Paradoxical Outcome, and I don't care about either of those cards being in my hand with the way my deck is built. So it's just like kind of funny. But even in Legacy Hogak, I don't think Cabal Therapy is that good, and that's because of 2019 and 2020. Where the power level of everything is shifted, and there's so many more cards now that are just playable cards that end the game, where if you're a deck that's trying to name Force of Will, are you going to name Force of Will and then look sad when you name Force of Negation? Or are you going to name Oko and then lose to their Uro, or whatever it is? I don't know.
Yeah, I again, without creating too big of a tangent, the recent year and a half of design has made discard really bad. Having to play a lot of standard for testing for the Pro Tours and stuff. Currently legal in standard are Duress, Thought Erasure, Agonizing Remorse, and Thought Distortion. And that's a pretty busted discard suite. Like, you can start discarding on turn 1. One of those things provides card selection for you. One of them exiles. One of them exiles everything. And it all sucks. Like, there's like Sultai, after the most recent round of bans, is one of the best decks in standard. It's just full of good cards, but people have been slowly cutting like the Thought Erasures and the Agonizing Remorses, and they're just jamming Nissa, Who Shakes the World, and Uro, and Hydroid Krasis. And like, you just can't discard to stop a plan anymore, because the card off the top of the deck is going to kill you by itself. So it would make sense that trickles back to Legacy a bit too.
Where in Legacy, there's also Veil of Summer, but on top of that, if you're someone playing Duress in Legacy, and let's say you're living in this magical Christmas land where you don't get hit by Veil of Summer, you're going to look at Force blue card in your opponent's hand, and now you're like, great, if this was Veil of Summer, they'd at least have to force it.
Yep, guaranteed.
There used to be a time in Legacy where discard was pretty good, where like there were a decent number of Thought Seizes. Like, when your opponent's primary win condition was like 2 Jaces, 1 Entreat the Angels. If you like bring one of those to the graveyard, like, you bought a lot of time by taking one of those cards. And now decks are really threat dense compared to how they used to be. The discard doesn't quite have the same oomph that it used to be.
It does not. And like, discarding their Uro, whoopsie doozies. Yeah, no good there. And like, that was in the before Veil of Summer time also. Like, remember when Hymn to Turok was just in the best deck? Like, Grixis Control and Check Pile before it. Like, that deck was embraced by a lot of really smart, capable players because it provided so many options, and Hymn to Turok was such a banger. And now they get to just counter it for free and replace the card. Like, yeah, so discard is a little bit worse. I don't know how we got there, but I was talking about Cabal Therapy not being great when you only have 3 creatures and you can't get them back. So,
fuck Hymn to Turok.
All right. Well, I'm also on the fuck Hymn to Turok plan. Like, as a blue player, like, when that hits like my land, I'm just like, okay, I'm dead. Like that. I agree. I used to have to bring in every Flusterstorm that I was playing against like creature decks. Like, I had to bring in Flusterstorm against Leovold decks because they would curve him into Leovold. It felt so bad. So I'm glad that card is mostly in the bin, but Veil of Summer is a hell of a card.
So since we started talking about these 2019 cards, it's probably a good point to pivot into our last section, which is sort of a cost-benefit analysis of your quote-unquote bad cards. So you get to play cards like Uro, Oko, Karn, Narset, Teferi, Dreadhorde Arcanist, all these sorts of things in your deck if you want. So why shouldn't you? Why should you play these cards like Changeling Outcast, or Cabal Therapy, or Chrome Mox, whatever it is that you're thinking about? Why should you not just jam as many 2019, 2020 cards as you can into a deck and call it a day? Why should you get cute with your deck building? So you have to figure out what is my benefit? Where is the tipping point where playing this subpar card actually is better than just jamming a whole bunch of generically good cards into a deck?
Well, I would like to say, Phil, that I am very lucky and that my favorite cute card that probably was never good enough became a necessary thing when they printed Veil of Summer. That I'm just Wizards looking out for me by making Grape Shot eternally playable. Respect, Wizards.
I mean, and there have been a lot of kind of cute and cheeky things that you've played. You played Hope of Girapur for a long time, and that was cool.
The printing of Icefang Coatl really made Hope of Girapur not as good anymore. And now with Sharknado or Shark Typhoon, what it's actually called, I don't know if Hope is ever going to be playable again. It would take quite a bit for Hope to come back.
It's a shame.
Bottom.
That card did some real cool things with Luris too, but let's not delve back into that.
So you have at this point highlighted between realism and Magic Christmas Land. And Hope is sort of that thing where it was good a year ago, but realistically the card just probably doesn't have a home anymore because of the way that Legacy's shifted in the last year. And I was only playing Hope for a year before it became outclassed. Its life wasn't super long. In theory, you could still run Xanad Swarm, but are you going to attack as a bluff one turn and then get Ice Fanged?
Yeah, that's embarrassing.
So it's sometimes really hard to tell where this line is, and you just need to get in there and you need to play some games. So, for example, I recently played an Ominous Seas Greater Good deck that was essentially Snowco deck minus about 7 cards to play Ominous Seas and Greater Good. And let me tell you, the Ominous Seas, they were pretty good. The Greater Goods, they were boarded out every single round and were just dead weight in my deck, and I should have just been playing Snowco. I was really excited about this idea. It was super cool. You can theoretically draw your whole library and make a bunch of Krakens, but in practice, I was just doing something that never happened. Between things getting countered and discarded and me having to interact with my opponents, not a single time over the course of a league did I assemble Ominous Seas and Greater Good together, despite playing 4 Ominous Seas and 3 Greater Goods. So I played a league where I was just playing a worse version of a Tier 1 deck. And that was the reality of that situation. I didn't have enough synergy to make the juice worth the squeeze.
Yeah, and that's one of the first things I say to people when they come to me with an idea, where they're like, what if we put, 1 Training Grounds in my blue-white Eldrazi deck so I can go infinite sometimes? And it's okay, how often is that going to happen versus, you just wish you drew, something that attacks for damage? That's the... And, it's the situation, or that's just an example, but you know what I mean. I have a number of friends. I had basically my entire college play group was like this, where they would just come up yo, I thought of this thing. This card and this card work together. I figured we could just shove it into Bug Standstill. It's but why? What does it do? Why do we want that? And it just doesn't make any sense to do that. Which brings us into our next thing here, which is the cute card a singleton or a 4 of? Is it the strategy, or is it just something you want to do? And how hard are you leaning into it? And is it optional or is it the plan? And this is like the infamous Richard Shea Demir charm in Grixis Control, where Rich is willing to play any stupid one of as long as it's blue so he can pitch it to Force of Will. Like, he'll try anything. Just straight-faced, like, yeah, I think Jameer Charm has some applications. And if it's bad, I'll just pitch it to Force. So, like, that was probably better as just some legacy playable card in his deck, but he got away with it because it wasn't that big of a deal. Compare that to the Retrofitter Foundry, where I imagine this process was, I don't know who broke it, who found this, but, like, power to them. But I suspect they realized, like, hey, these are Thopters. I'm going to try, like, 2 of these. And then they were like, wow, that's good. I'll play 3. And then they were like, oh my god, this is essential. I want 4. And I anyone who's brewed a deck has had that moment where it's like, okay, this is too cute. It doesn't do enough. It's out, versus this is insane and I need more of it. And that's the sort of decision that, like, you can turn Magical Christmas Land. Like, finding a 1 of when you need it at the right time is kind of Christmas Land. Finding a 4 of because you're going to need it often, that's realistic.
The 1 ofs become better if you have things like tutors to make them viable. So Esper Vile, for example, has a bunch of Recruiter of the Guards and things like Soul Herders to reuse them. So playing a bunch of super questionable singletons there for fringe scenarios is perhaps more justifiable than it is to, I don't know, put your 1 of weird card into Maverick or something.
Red Stompy.
Yeah, into Moon Stompy.
You just have one 6-mana Chandra in your Red Stompy deck.
No, you need like 3 of those. They're so good.
Right.
Although, admittedly, the 5-mana one, Chandra Heart of Fire, is now seeing a decent amount of play over 6-mana one.
Yeah, I've seen that in lists.
I have mixed thoughts about that, but that's another episode.
Right. Yeah, like the one Manriki Gusari we were talking about earlier, that goes in a Stoneforge Mystic deck. You can go get it when you want it. Compare that to, like, one Mirren Crusader or something else that, like, could be in Death and Taxes. It's like, well, what if my opponent's a Tarmogoyf deck? It's like, until Recruiter of the Guard was printed, that was just going to be in your deck sometimes. You have no way to find it. You don't even draw cards with Death and Taxes. Like, you got to think about what your rate of return on this card is going to be when you put it in the deck.
For what it's worth, what we're discussing with is your card a 1 of or a 4 of, there was a solid month or two where when Wishclaw Talisman came out, Alex McKinley was convinced it was okay as a 1 of. And I was like, I don't think that card's good of. And Alex kept on testing it. And he's like, Brian, this card's been fine. I'm like, Alex, you're drunk. This card's not that good. And then, like, at 3 a.m, when I was just staring at my TES list after a bad losing streak, and it, like, clicked in my head, like, well, what if it wasn't a 1 of? What if it was a 4 of? And now all of a sudden we could support Mox Opals, and everything started coming together. And when the TES chat read my madman rant of possible deck building theory in the morning, I was like, I don't know if any of this is a good idea. We played some leagues and eventually, like, came together with a somewhat coherent list, but sometimes it's those out-of-the-box thoughts are like, well, what if it isn't your cue card? What if it actually is just a part of your core strategy? And most of the time it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's your Wishclaw Talisman that ends up being better than Infernal Tutor, your staple that you've played for 10 years. But it requires reevaluating your cards and the way that you think about your deck.
And sometimes just changing the number on a card drastically changes how that card is played. Palace Jailer is a great example of that. So originally the tech was you run 1 Palace Jailer so that you can find it with Recruiter of the Guard and take over a game versus a deck like Miracles as the game goes long. And then the tech became you have a second, because you want to have the safety net for if your opponent is able to take the crown, you want to be able to use your next tutor or like Flicker with Blink your Recruiter in order to take the crown back. And having that second Palace Jailer just like completely changes the dynamics of a game. The same is true with a lot of other cards. Like the more copies you have of them, the more you can lean into that synergy. Like if you can be the Monarch and then tutor for another Palace Jailer as a safety net, or like have another Palace Jailer to exile yet another creature on your opponent's board, like you start doing really gross things.
Yeah, that's the same as I keep mentioning Supreme Verdict as one of my role players that I play. Like, there was a time where I went from 4 Terminus down to 3 and 1 Supreme Verdict, just to have a little more agency in when I could Wrath. And then I realized this card's a banger. And then I just, like, had a second one in the sideboard to go with my 3rd Terminus. And then I was on, like, 2 main with 1 Terminus main, and, like, just realizing that this was a better sweeper in certain environments. And you just really start to get your opponent who thinks you have to set up a Terminus, where it's like, I can shove until they brainstorm or ponder, then I have to pump the brakes, see if they flow to the Terminus, and then you just tap 4 mana and kill all their shit. Like, that's like one of those paradigm shifts that, like, really changes how you get to play a game and changes how an opponent has to respond to you.
A lot of times you get this, like, almost a rogue advantage by changing known quantities in your deck, right? So if you're doing something that's slightly different from the norm, a great current example is there's the Pokemokey deck that's running around that is essentially like a mid-range deck that's running Stifle, that, like, is apparently doing quite well, and it's one of those things where the opponent is not expecting to have to play around Stifle, and they're just completely getting got by it.
And we see that in, like, a mini version anytime you play with or against Delver. It's like, how many daisies are in this deck right now? And after board, like, we see this dance, and you're basically just taking that dance up to the big stage and, like, let's dance. I think that a person who plays Daiseless Delver would gain a lot of advantages in a lot of spots. They'd also sometimes just fucking lose because they can't daze their opponent's spell. But, like, and if deckless ever opened up, then they would be dead immediately. But, like, that's the sort of experiment that we're talking about here.
Stifle is one of those cards where it fits into the synergy aspect, where if you're a Delver deck and you're playing Wasteland Stifle Daze, yeah, it fits into the synergy of your deck, where you're not necessarily playing the just better singleton card deck. That said, the Stifle list have, like, come back a little bit in the last 2 weeks, but they're still not winning as much as just playing the Oko, like, Haymaker Stifle lists. And Legacy is ultimately a format where you get to play what you want, which is why you can play Rug Control with Stifles in it. But I think if there were larger events like Star Cities going on, where you could actually play Legacy, or maybe more events like the Format Championship, you wouldn't see as many people messing around with cards like Stifle on their deck. You'd see more, I know Anurag top-8'd with the Rug Stifle deck, but it's like one of those cards where it almost feels like a relic from the past, and the people that play Stifle are nostalgic for the card rather than, I think that this is a 2020 playable.
Yeah, maybe we'll deep dive into this deck list if it keeps putting up some results later. But I think it's we would go very wide with that topic very quickly. So, kind of focusing back in on the cost-benefit analysis thing here. When you're playing these cards, a lot of times you want to be thinking about, like, is this card that I'm putting into my deck list that is, like, weak, is this actually going to change my matchups? Like, what benefit am I getting out of this? Am I getting enough of a benefit that it's worth the drawbacks? Do I have enough redundancy? Do I have enough tutors? Do I have enough synergy that, like, this card is actually going to be good? Or is it the sort of thing where it's like, it was fine in game 1, but I'm going to board it out in, 7 of my 9 rounds in this tournament?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the most important question to ask. Like, be honest with yourself. What is your motivation for trying this weirdo card? Like, are you getting some, like, brewer's high of, like, I'm doing something no one else is, even to my tournamental detriment? Or have I actually figured something out here? And if you answer that question that I just want to be different, that's fine. But you're not allowed to be mad later when your plan doesn't work. Just saying, your friends don't want to hear it. So if your goal is to win the most matches, and you're looking at, like, your Ancient Tombs and basic lands, and you're like, I could play Soldier Stompy. Like, is that a better option than Moon Stompy? And the answer is probably no. Almost certainly no. And, like, that's just like, if you're the soldier stompy person, cool. Stomp those soldiers. Live your best life. But if you want to win the tournament, you should play the better deck.
I don't understand why you had to attack Phil to close out a podcast episode.
I mean, to be fair, we usually attack each other in some way or another to close out these episodes.
Yeah, I honestly, I have a friend, his name is Max. He top-aided Eternal Weekend with Splinter Twin a number of years ago. And he is one of my most consistent supporters. When I was streaming, he was there almost every night. He comments on most of my YouTube videos now. He moved away years ago, but he still is dedicated to following my content, and he rules. He is just deep on Soldier Stompy. He works hard on that deck. He has it completely foiled out, and he knows he was a really good Miracles player. I think he has some number of Star City top 8s with Miracles. He was a very good player of a very good deck, and then just yeeted it into the sun and became a Soldier Stompy player. And he knows what he's doing, and power to him. I'm certainly not shitting on people just for playing Soldier Stompy.
All right. Well, I hope we've given you some interesting things to think about in terms of deck building. Take it to heart, just like we've taken all of your wonderful feedback and love to heart. Now we've brought it full circle. Isn't that great?
I'm up to a 9.9.
We better stop here before we max out that meter and cause you to gush on air. That'd be too much.
Yeah, I'll just pass out.
All right, folks. I hope you have a great rest of the week. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.